Welcome everybody to another episode of Need Some Introduction. I'm your host, Victor, and on this podcast, we're usually going week to week, watching something, introducing all of you, hopefully, to something new to watch, and providing some camaraderie and context along the way. Currently, we are watching Alien Earth, halfway through that very interesting series. And of course, in this set of episodes, watching Dexter Resurrection, the now third iteration of this Dexter franchise. Today's this penultimate episode of the season, which now has been officially confirmed for Season 2. The title of this episode is Touched by an Angel. Sona will not be joining me for this particular episode, but I'll be getting her reaction to this episode because our families are vacationing together over this holiday weekend. So I'll be sure to record a reaction from her while we're together. And I'll append that to the episode I have scheduled for Monday for the holiday. I've already started recording it, a box office breakdown for the season and what trends we could infer from those movies and their results at the US and worldwide box office. This is actually very interesting to me, period of time for the movie industry, considering we're coming out of the pandemic and then coming off of the writer strikes. And the industry fundamentally is changing due to digital streaming and digital distribution, and how fundamentally that has changed versus the previous revenue streams of theatrical box office and then home video, mostly DVD and Blu-ray in the recent years, and how for a period of time, the foreign box office became such a huge part of any kind of decision-making for films that would be coming out in the future, the type of productions we would be seeing. So everything is shaking up and we're right in the midst of it, and interesting patterns to see there right in the actual box office results. So in that episode as well, as I mentioned, I will be following up with Sona on her reaction to Dexter Resurrection and how she thinks this sets up the finale. And of course, we will be back next Friday, both of us, to discuss that season finale. And we will also be previewing our next show, which is premiering just a week after that in the subsequent Monday slot. We will be discussing the first episode of Task, the new HBO Max Mark Ruffalo series from the creator of Mayor of Easttown, Brad Englesby. If that sounds interesting to you and you'd like to get notifications as soon as these episodes become available, make sure you have subscribed to us on your podcatcher of choice if you haven't already done so. Reach out to us, needssomeintroduction@gmail.com. And I think I'm taking the plunge. I am going to start a social media channel. Stay tuned for details on that. I think I'm going to go Blue Sky. I'll keep you posted once that goes live. Oh, and since I have this extra space here in the podcast, traditionally when I do a recap episode by myself, as you would expect without conversation, these episodes run relatively short. So I have compiled a list of the 5 most depicted real-world serial killers in fictional, or I should say in dramatizations, and some of those films that I've seen and I do recommend. And as a matter of fact, a couple of these people that we'll be discussing in that list have new projects, they're new dramatic miniseries coming in the near term. So I'll use that as a little bit of a preview of some things you might be seeing or watching later this year, mostly in October, as you would expect. Okay, as a way to fill out the episode, I was thinking about our perpetual fascination with fictional and real-world serial killers, not just in Dexter, of course, but just think about the whole serial killer genre. It's really shocking. There are famous stage plays that were made into thrillers back in the 1930s and 40s about serial killers. Of course, there is Jack the Ripper all the way to the turn of the century, which was such a phenomenal, famous serial killer, but not the first, but really became like the template of all serial killers. And really, that's where it originated from. And it's almost as if the serial killer and the movie business, or the popularization of the concept of the serial killer and the technology of filmmaking, were birthed nearly the exact same time. And this very long career, history, I should say, of the serial killer in filmdom, whether it is even the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, arguably a film about a serial killer. M, of course, an incredible film, by the way, M, another film from the 1930s, I believe. There is the film The Lodger, an early Hitchcock film about a fictionalized Jack the Ripper-like character, and throughout the 40s and the 50s, and then, of course, in 1960, Psycho. And then the idea, other than Jack the Ripper, who was such this mystery, it can impose different metaphors onto, or it could be a boogeyman, it could be somebody who's in power, who's protected by the powers that be, a very easy symbol to explore different themes through. But the idea of actually, in many ways, valorizing the intelligence or the technique or the predatory nature of the serial killer doesn't really emerge, especially not taking actual real-world examples of these really despicable crimes and popularizing them. And in a way, it starts with Psycho because it is loosely based, very loosely based on a real-world case. But then throughout the 70s, it's mostly slasher films. These, of course, are serial killers. There's the fear that at any time someone can kill you unexpectedly in the safety of the suburbs, usually rural areas as well, I should say. And of course, this evolves from this brutal, faceless, force of nature type killer in a way back to the template set in 1960 by Peeping Tom and Psycho of knowing intimately who the killer is and their motivations and their warped psychology, making the serial killer the center, or in many ways, the protagonist of the story. And there are many thrillers in the 80s and, of course, throughout the 90s in which that is the template that's being represented there. You think about Manhunter, you think about Silence of the Lambs, both featuring Hannibal Lecter, the character, and then Seven. So this cycle of serial killer films runs from the early 80s to the late 90s. And then things change. Like the serial killer film has changed once again. We have seen slashers once again come back in the late 90s, of course, with Scream, and then that has faded out, but then it's coming back yet again. So a very different template for that type of character. But most importantly, a new cycle in the past 10 years of representing these real-life serial killers of the 70s and 80s, popularized in that time period, but a real deconstruction in which these super predators are not valorized for their cold-hearted nature, but really an examination of the cultural moment that allowed these killers to prey on populations that were not protected by the powers that be because they were seen as undesirables. And by the way, that goes all the way back to Jack the Ripper himself, who of course preyed on these poor single moms usually, who had oftentimes turned to sex work, but were not necessarily like kind of the popularization of them as sex workers is very different than the idea of simply being impoverished and doing whatever it takes to make ends meet, to the point that a lot of those victims were not even sex workers. But that was how it was portrayed in the media at the time, and still portrayed that way even in contemporary tellings of that. Of course, another massive thing to bring up here is that as we have seen fewer and fewer of these serial killer thrillers, of course, it's not like these stories have just gone away. As a matter of fact, they're arguably more popular than ever before because of the massive popularity of true crime podcasts and miniseries and Netflix series and movies. And probably we don't get these fictional thrillers anymore because we're just overwhelmed by so many of these real-world retellings of these characters. Okay, so finally, I'm going to get to this is in no way very thorough. It is based on a cursory examination, mostly of a Wikipedia article that had all of the most famous American serial killers, mostly American, and then the number of links, like literally using the metadata from the articles to have the number of links that come back from the in popular culture, linking to other movies, podcasts, etc. So this is a cursory, but I think pretty accurate representation of real life serial killers who have been represented the most in popular fiction. And some things you might want to watch that honestly, I don't want to glamorize these characters, to be totally honest. I think that Dexter obviously is one of those type of fun serial killer stories that maybe more than any other property out there ever, even more so than the Silence of the Lambs and Hannibal Lecter films, literally makes you root for the killer and sands away all the most disgusting aspects of what his actual proclivities are. So hopefully my recommendations here are a bit of a corrective to the popular imagination of these killers. All right, before we get into the top 5, this list of infamy, a few dishonorable mentions. First of all, a very famous, the most famous serial killer in Russian history, Andrei Chikatilo. I don't know I don't know if it's one of the most popular representations, but I did want to shout it out because there is a very good movie on HBO made in 1995 called Citizen X, still available to stream on Max if you have it, that shows how this killer was captured and very much goes into the procedural aspects of the investigation and how this was something that the Russian government didn't even want to acknowledge, of course, because Russia was trying to promote itself as like serial killers, only something that happens in America, that disgusting America. Something like that would never happen in Soviet Russia. So it takes on some of these social issues, this cultural issues at the time, and very well performed, really intriguing film. And that's Citizen X on HBO. Okay, the next thing I want to bring up, of course, have to bring this up, even though it's not in the top 5, is Ed Gein. So Ed Gein, not going to go into all the details of this, but you could guess from some of the descriptions of the movies that I'm about to mention, the first really culturally cornerstone serial killer beyond Jack the Ripper, of course, British, but and the American serial killer, to a large extent, the popularization of that idea. First of all, the inspiration for the book Psycho, which of course turns into the film Psycho. He mummified his mother, had this affinity to his mother even when she was no longer alive. And also the inspiration for Leatherface, the character from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, now in its 50th anniversary, coming out for a 50th anniversary re-release. 2 very different versions of that story, obviously, where the Texas Chainsaw Massacre goes straight on into the grungy 70s exploitation look and feel. One of the most brilliant horror films of all times, of course, but a tough watch and a very different in style from the more classical and formal and also brilliant Psycho from 1960, but very, very different. And also one of the inspirations for Buffalo Bill in The Silence of the Lambs. Also, of course, Charlize Theron in 2003 won an Academy Award for portraying Eileen Wuornos in the film Monster. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, another very popularly represented serial killer. I do want to shout out the excellent The Night Stalker Netflix series. This has some recreations, but primarily is a straight documentary. And really fascinatingly, not only shows you the investigation and each one of the crimes and how they close in on him and how the public actually eventually captured himself, but then during the court case, this bizarre thing that we've seen happen multiple times with these killers and cult leaders as well, where they become sex symbols to a certain subset of the population. So very troubling as well. But this miniseries explores this topic very, very thoroughly from many different perspectives, talks to the victims, talks to the investigators. So it's a very interesting and thorough investigation. And that's The Night Stalker on Netflix. Okay, so let's get to number 5, a high point here in many ways. Zodiac, the Zodiac Killer. There's about 10 to 12 representations in popular films. Of course, most famously in the absolutely brilliant Zodiac from 2007. David Fincher. I remember when I saw Zodiac, I had always had an issue with 7. It's not only that the killer in many ways wins, but the killer is right. So the film seems to take on the perspective of the serial killer and accentuates it. And I had moral issues with that film, even when I first saw it when I was much younger. And as soon as I saw Zodiac, I loved it. And primarily because I felt like, and I'm a big fan of Fincher in general, but I felt like Fincher was doing a correction on the previous film. And he didn't say it at the time, but in a recent interview, he has said that he wanted Zodiac to be a corrective to 7 and the version of this all-knowing mastermind killer, instead of this, not only the actual work that it takes to catch one of these killers, but of course the obsession that not only fans of the killer have, but that the actual investigators eventually get caught up in. So it, in a way, investigates our own cultural fascination with these figures and criticizes it and explores it in really intriguing ways and just some of the best filmmaking you'll ever see. And of course, Fincher, was directly inspired by not a film about the Zodiac Killer, but about a South Korean killer made by Bong Joon-ho called Memories of Murder, and another brilliant film to track down. Okay, coming in at number 4, John Wayne Gacy. Now, I honestly haven't seen a lot of these films based on him, so I'm not sure if any of these were really good. But just this week, we saw a trailer for John Wayne Gacy, Devil in Disguise, and this is coming in October 16th on Peacock. The entire show will be available as a binge. I don't know if it's going to be good, but what I would say is that I'm intrigued. This stars Michael Chernus from Severance. That's right, the sweet, dumb Rickon Hale is playing John Wayne Gacy, and this is directed by Patrick McManus, who made the, I thought, very, very good The Girl from Plainville series. And I do think this might be a good film for a couple of reasons. This is based on the John Wayne Gacy Devil in Disguise documentary series that played on Peacock back in 2021. And if you do any exploration of the Gacy case, it is so shocking that this investigation was so mishandled. And that documentary captures all of that. And I assume that that same gimlet eye view from our current perspective is in this new production. So once again, that's coming in October, mid-October. John Wayne Gacy, a truly disgusting but pathetic figure, and hopefully one that's represented that way in this new version. Another truly pathetic character, Jeffrey Dahmer at number 3. A couple of recommendations. I think I've made these on the podcast before. First of all, the film Dahmer, which not a great film, but a great performance from Jeremy Renner before he was famous, playing Jeffrey Dahmer, Bruce Davison playing his father. And this film does not have any murders in it. Almost the entire film are these vignettes, almost like a stage play, where we see him meeting with his victims before the killings. So it really makes you sympathize with this very alienated and troubled person, and also humanizes the victims. Once again, Jeremy Renner, this is the performance that really put him on the map. This film is very easy to find to stream. And some of that very technique that we see in that film was brought into Ryan Murphy's mixed, but I think mostly successful Dahmer series for Netflix. There's some terrible aspects of that film, but I think at its best, it's actually a very interesting story about this extremely dangerously alienated youth. And now he was just operating in broad daylight, and how people just looked the other way because they thought he was just not the profile of a killer. And of course, he was preying on these gay men and gay boys, and the police didn't really want to look too closely, and it just allowed this to happen again. This is a system failure after system failure, and familiar failures too. A lot of these men came from broken homes. It covers this in great detail. It's not a perfect version of it, but at its best, it's actually pretty enlightening. And one last Dahmer recommendation, again, with no murders in it. Maybe one murder, I forget, but I think it's just a fantasy. My Friend Dahmer, based on a comic book that was written by someone who was an actual classmate of Dahmer. And the film, like the comic, is mostly from the friend's POV. And again, intriguing to tangentially not look at the most grotesque aspects of the crimes, but to look on the purview of it and imagine this person before they were a killer and what brought them to that moment. It is a very interesting way to explore the topic and very well made. Again, that's called My Friend Dahmer. Again, very easy to find for streaming. Oh, and of course, I just mentioned Ryan Murphy's Jeffrey Dahmer series. This monster series, which of course started with Dahmer, was a massive success on Netflix. They followed that up with the Menendez brothers in last year's Monsters sequel series. And now we have another monster series coming out, also, I think October 3rd, about Ed Gein, which I just mentioned in our dishonorable mentions here, starring Charlie Hunnam. I'm not sure this is going to work, but like I said, I was surprised with that Dahmer series at its best. And I've heard description of the Ed Gein miniseries is that it explores not only Ed Gein's life, but the pop cultural hysteria that builds around the story. This is back in the 50s at this point, around this character and the way the media sensationalizes the story and preys on these victims in their own way. And of course, that being commentary on the current moment. This could work. Ryan Murphy and me usually don't mix. But like I said, I'm willing to be surprised. I did think that the Dahmer series mostly worked. So, okay, number 2, Ted Bundy. There's been some very popular documentaries about him recently. I haven't seen any of the recent ones, but I do remember in my own mind how this, as a child, this was the whole concept of the serial killer, probably my first realization that it wasn't like a slasher killer, but these people really existed in the real world, was when I saw The Deliberate Stranger. I think Mark Harmon played Ted Bundy in that TV film, or was it a miniseries? I don't even remember at this point, from 1986. So once again, these stories have been around for a while. The media has circled these and feasted on these stories for a long time. And as I mentioned, I think just in the past year or two, there's been at least one, if not more than one, very popular docudrama, docuseries about this. Zac Efron played Ted Bundy in another Netflix series, which I have not watched, but came out relatively recently, about 6 years ago, I think. Which, of course, brings us to number 1, the granddaddy of all of these serial killers, and really popularized this concept of a serial killer, Jack the Ripper, with at least 30 film adaptations. And when you think about the fictionalized films like Time After Time, time-traveling Jack the Ripper, Jack's Back, another potential time-traveling Jack the Ripper film. This story is over 100 years old and still continues to fascinate people. Of course, the fact that it was never resolved, there's really no good suspects. There's so many different theories on who it could have been. Still, even now, no real definitive theory of who might have been the perpetrator. And this has been fictionalized representations of the killer many times. From Hell is an intriguing film, not fully successful, but very stylish, and does touch on some of these themes of the women who were dragged through the mud because of these stories and the media fixation on this. But the recommendations I have here is actually a book written by Hallie Rubenhold back in 2019. The book is called The Five, The Untold Lives of the Women Killed by Jack, which, as I mentioned before, really challenges the idea that these women were prostitutes. They were labeled that way. They may have occasionally dabbled in sex work, but that was not uncommon among these very impoverished women, and really does this deep forensic analysis on each one of these women and their full biographies. Just by recentering the story around the victims, it really makes the story very fresh and just reminds us that these killers are not these idyllic heroes or superhumans. They simply are predators preying on the most perilous members of a society, and how they don't get caught because the society at large does not want to accept the fact or acknowledge the social problems that lead to these forgotten people. All right, hope you find some interesting content in there. But now onto a much goofier version of the serial killer. And of course, that's why we're here. We want here to have fun. This is a little sobering stuff here. Let's get on to the fun content. Here's the breakdown of our most recent episode of Dexter Resurrection. Touched by an angel with the tilde over the A, we pick up immediately where we left off last week. Dexter is not happy to have Prater talking to Harrison. Harrison, of course, is starstruck. How do you know my dad? He doesn't use the name Dexter. And by the way, Prater continuously calls him Red over and over again. Harrison doesn't comment on this either. And Harrison, of course, knows who this guy is, would be incredibly famous billionaire in the context of this show. Harrison turns out to be a true fan of this guy, has watched all his TED Talks. He asks him, hey, are you in school? Harrison's, well, I'm kind of in between things. I'm working at the Empire Hotel. Oh, interesting. That'll play into the plot later this episode. Dexter's like, we need to go talk outside immediately. Dexter does not like when his prey has henchmen. Charlie's out there, ha-ha, I got you, ha-ha. Uma Thurman doing her best snarky look. She does do some Kill Bill, or at least Kill Bill reminiscent dialogue very much later in the episode, but definitely a callback to that. I do wonder if this is where the bride ended up. Maybe this is the job that the bride ended up with years later. It wouldn't be the first time she worked for a serial killer if that's the case. Prater is still kind of a dum-dum here, has not connected the dots that maybe this isn't really Red yet. This is the most outlandish part of this whole entire plot. The idea that these people are not smart enough to just do a Google image search or something, people. And it gets even worse when Charlie eventually interrogates Harrison and finds out what his last name is. Once again, just Google that and you find out that this guy, whose dad is Dexter Morgan, that's where the last name comes from. And a picture of Dexter Morgan would give this away pretty quickly. And he's definitely been in the papers. We see him on multiple internet articles that are searchable with the name Dexter Morgan. All right, that's one of my main pet peeves for this particular episode. But of course, suspension of disbelief. I mean, I think Dexter in general, lots of suspension of disbelief in general with these seasons of this show. There is an interesting question here where he asks him, does Dexter know who you really are? I'm sorry, does Harrison know who you really are? He asks Dexter. And it's an interesting moment in the show because does he know who you are, Red? No, I'm not Red. I'm actually Dexter. Does he know who you are? Really? In a way, yes, he knows. He has the code. He knows he kills people. So in some ways, he really does know Dexter. And in some ways, Dexter is unknowable to his son. There's probably aspects of him that he doesn't really want to share with his son, to say the least. He doesn't know about this, for example. I'm hanging out with a club of serial killers, and one of them's a billionaire. And this is all hand waved away by the fact that he's just like, I have a special connection with you, Red. I've never had this connection with my other serial killer buddies. Okay, we'll buy it. You know what? Most of us watching this show are probably fans of Dexter anyway, so we get it. We get the charisma's there. A version of charisma here, Dexter's version of charisma. And he says, we need to meet one-on-one. I need to know the real you. You need to share with me finally. And of course, that's going to pay off later on. At this moment, as I'm watching it, I do start to think, is this a setup? I always think that these characters have got to be smarter about this. But I guess they get to the same location in a kind of dumb way, honestly. And maybe I'll save my thoughts for later in the episode. But I think there was a cleverer way they could have gotten to the exact same location. Dexter runs back into the restaurant, doesn't eat his steak, doesn't take the dessert wine. He's like, don't want it, don't want it. And on the soundtrack, Jump Into the Fire by Harry Nilsson. Darren and I were just talking about this song being in the finale of Smoke a couple of weeks ago. And then a couple of days later, I was watching Snack Shack. Very funny comedy, by the way. This reminiscence of being a young entrepreneur in the early 90s, something that I can relate to, by the way. And a chaotic summer. A lot of fun. Do track it down if that sounds intriguing to you, or if you like those type of late summer movies, because it is a bittersweet film. But that movie kicks in with the song Jump Into the Fire by Harry Nilsson. And here we have it again 3 times in about a week, maybe a week and a half, which is a crazy amount of coincidence to hear this song. But it's a great song. By the way, if you do listen to this and you want that crazy drum breakdown that you heard in the Smoke finale, the version you want to hear is the 7-minute album version, not the single version, which is just like 3 minutes long. And as Jump Into the Fire is playing on the soundtrack, a metaphor, of course, out of the frying pan into the fryer over and over again, Dexter and Harrison go walking down the street of New York, openly having a conversation. Well, you see, I'm in this club with serial killers. And I just think about all the people they're walking past who, at least they should have had earbuds in their ears, which is actually the reality of the world right now. But almost none of these extras have earbuds in. But you know what? Those earbuds in, people could be talking about planning an assassination right next to you. You wouldn't hear them in most cases. Not a great sign of the times, but that's how it is. But here they're just walking around talking about serial killers and his true identity. And it's a pretty hilarious conversation. He tells him everything. Well, you know, I killed that dark passenger serial killer. I kind of took his place. That's why I've been doing the ride share, or I guess Harrison kind of susses that out. I found this invitation. It turned out there were these other serial killers. And Harrison figures out, oh, that's where you met Mia. Ooh, and guess what? I killed Gemini. Twins. Dexter's not an emotive person in general, but that's gave him a little psycho boner there talking about that. And the whole time we're seeing someone slurking in the background. Of course, we know it's Angel taking pictures and tracking their movements. Dexter's smart enough to jump onto the subway with his son and then at the last moment jump off just in case he's being tracked. So Angel loses him. Little funny aside here, by the way. Angel curses when he misses the train. And of course, a very New York moment where the mom swears even more so, being like, hey, don't you say those words around my daughter, while she's swearing up a storm herself. Okay, another thing that's probably not going to pay off until next episode. Harrison meets up with his buddy, the one who sold the car for him, who's kind of his connection with all these other illicit things going on in the city, in the lockers where they meet or they change when they arrive at work. And he mentions that, hey, you can get some extra money. Prater's having this big gala, and you can make some extra money here. So Harrison's going to be lured into this, maybe. His friend's definitely going to be there. So just trying to, you see how these different events and different characters are all circling the same final event, which I had actually suspected maybe we'd see part of the gala this week and then some kind of cliffhanger at the end. But instead, we're actually seeing all of this as a setup for what's going to probably be a very eventful final episode. Then the show has some weird timing thing here. Harrison arrives, gets called up to a room where Charlie is. And rather than playing out the scene, this is an odd choice, I have to say. Rather than playing out the scene and potentially building up some suspense by not knowing whether Harrison's going to get out of there alive or not, or whether he's going to get kidnapped as some kind of leverage that he knows, or that Charlie, I should say, knows more about his true identity and his connection to Dexter. So all these questions could be playing out in that hotel room. But instead, immediately, we jump from him arriving at the hotel room to him talking to Dexter on the phone and explaining what actually happened. And then we're cutting back. It's not even like they didn't shoot the scene. They cut back to what happened in the room. Very weird choice, I have to say, because this could have been a very suspenseful moment in the episode. Not the choice I would have made, and not sure why they did it this way. Usually in a show, you would do this because you're supposed to not trust what the person who is telling you happened in the room actually happened. That way we don't get to witness it. We get to hear it secondhand. So maybe he's hiding something, but I don't think Harrison's hiding anything here. And as a matter of fact, we even see that Charlie does have later on the actual glass from the hotel room and the one that Harrison delivered, probably to run fingerprints or DNA. So strange choices, to say the least. So she starts asking some obvious questions. Why the last name is different. I took my stepmom's last name, which is true, but of course she got her last name from marrying Dexter Morgan. So once again, just one more step in all this. Charlie, in other words, is not a very good investigator. She may be really good at somehow tracking down these serial killers. Maybe they're not that good at covering their tracks, because what we've seen of her investigative skills here are not that impressive, to be honest. If she just literally went one more layer on each one of these steps in her investigation, she would have found Dexter multiple times now. Where was your dad when you were growing up? He bailed on us. How did you find him? We got a postmark from a letter from New York. So Dexter does point out an interesting point here, which is true, which is keep the lies very close to the truth, because almost everything he said is true, right? He did have the letter that he had sent to Hannah. That letter, of course, was upstate New York. So almost nothing he says is overtly a lie. She finds out that he's an UR car driver now. And all of this seems like, oh, there's building some tension as to where the direction the investigation is going to go. A lot of this early part of the episode, honestly, is just not really going to pay off, because we get a very direct route to its destination without all this other subterfuge of like these multiple investigations going on. But I guess they needed to fill out the episode. And of course, he did not clear out all the dishes that he had brought, which was probably the actual goal of this whole entire thing. Dexter smartly thinks, you know what? You probably need to hang out with me until this all blows over. He goes and asks Blessing for his blessing to have his son stay with him. And more importantly, can you go pick up my son, by the way? Can you help me out? Because I got some stalking to do. I got some Dextering to do, or at least dark passengering to do. He does apologize. It's a good apology, by the way, of just saying, like, look, I thought, I honestly, once again, everything he said, I think was true, even though he was doing it with his very calculated, pathological way. He did think he was making amends to the daughter who was at the moment feeling alienated from the dad, not aware that this is only going to make it worse. And Blessing forgives him. And he's like, sure, I'll go pick up Harrison. This guy's very accommodating. Meanwhile, Dexter has tracked down where Charlie lives. See, he needs to be Prater's right-hand hench person, because he would figure out these serial killers in just moments. He goes into Charlie's house, and we find out a little bit of a twist here. Not that important, but a bit of a twist that I had continuously thought, maybe I just wasn't paying enough attention, that Charlie's mom was in some kind of nursing home. She's actually there in the house with him. So when she's visiting with her and talking to her, and she's semi-comatose or comatose, it turns out she's right there in the same house. While Dexter's snooping, he notices, as he would have expected, that she tried to lift fingerprints from this glass. Ghost Dad / Harry / Dexter's side persona says, "That bitch lifted prints from Harrison. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Chill out, Ghost Dad," with the throwing that B word around like that. Dexter reminds this other part of his brain where he shelters the ghost father. As I joked with Sona, by the way, I would love if it turned out that Harry is actually a ghost who has like an autonomous voice and is actually there as his conscience. I hope that is a reveal at some point in the future. And I'm only half joking about that. Dexter reminds him that, you know what, whatever fingerprint he finds, he was still underage. He doesn't have a driver's license. He hasn't been fingerprinted. He hasn't been arrested. So he's probably not going to figure out too much about him. Although I'm pretty sure we saw something to do with what happened in upstate New York in a newspaper article somewhere. And I think that was just attached to Harrison's name and definitely attached to Dexter's name. Charlie shows up in the neighborhood to buy some flowers for her mom. Dexter takes the opportunity while she's buying the flowers to jump into the back seat of the car and go full dark passenger here, still keeping up this facade. He uses the garroted chain on her neck and starts asking her questions. Once again, interesting here, actually, that this is exactly how the dark passenger operated when we saw the opening scenes of this very series. Wants them to basically beg for their lives and tell him anything he wants to hear. And he really follows this pattern pretty much to a T. How did you go from being a decorated military captain, I forget what rank she had, to serving as a henchman to Prater, who's collecting serial killers and subsidizing them? And she's pretty ashamed of herself here, but she says, look, I needed somebody to help me with my mother, and he has followed through. He has given her 8 years of life and counting, I guess. I mean, the quality of that life, I have a whole side question, totally different topic, as to whether this is a good trade-off. Is getting your vegetative mom more years of life of this quality, is it really worth this trade-off that she's made? But Dexter doesn't leave her off the hook that easy, saying, you see how you feel right now? That's how my son felt when you put that gun on the table in front of him. And she says, do you think that was my doing? You're so friendly with Prater. He told me to do everything that happened, even the gun on the table, that was all orchestrated by him. He exploits everyone's weaknesses. Okay, I still have no idea how this is going to pay off, but I should wrap that up, by the way. So Dexter does leave the car, does pull the chain pretty roughly and leave a mark on her neck, a pretty deep cut. But yes, so then we jump to the investigators. Again, I don't know if this is just filling time or if this is going to pay off somehow. I guess they're all going to be, maybe they will be in Prater's basement at some point before the end of the finale, and we'll find this weapon, possibly? Question mark. Basically, let me just get to it, that Staying Alive and her partner are following up on Dexter's lead that this could be a manhole cover lifter, this hook that they use. And they're like, I guess that's a clue, but there are many of these. But it is a bit of a lead, so let's look at people who worked for the city in that period of time that might fit the bill. Again, they definitely want to make this important, an important plot point, that they're aware of this and following up on this clue. And I feel like they are going to reveal who that killer was by the end of the season, but I still don't know how that ties in directly to the show. Angel shows up and Staying Alive fills him in. I got a call from Quinn. You're no longer a police detective. You're pretending to be a police officer. You're in violation of some code. And he's like, no, you don't understand. I apologize. I did mislead you, but it was just because I quit my job of my own volition to track down Dexter Morgan. I'm here to help you guys out. Now, I guess she's a real rule follower here, because she is taking the bait on this and saying like, no, you're trying to protect Dokes and Maria, and you have this vendetta against him. There's a lot. I mean, you arrested Harrison Morgan for this murder that follows the pattern of the Bay Harbor Butcher. And he is the son of Dexter Morgan. And Dexter Morgan has been tangentially, could be, on paper, just doing a 40,000-foot overview of the cases of the Bay Harbor Butcher. They overlap completely with Dexter Morgan's time at the Miami PD. Anyway, I think she's being way too dismissive about this, but unfortunately, I think this is a way to get her to tell Angel, you have to leave now, and I don't want to see you again, so that when he actually disappears, there's no questions asked. It's just a plot convenience here, unfortunately. He keeps saying Dexter Morgan is the Bay Harbor Butcher, but she's not hearing it. Poor Angel. Angel's got to keep doing this on his own. Turns out Angel has no idea who this billionaire who met with Dexter is, Prater, but he sees that Prater's having a police fundraiser as he's leaving the office. He doesn't watch all his TED Talks, definitely not. So now Angel has one more piece of the puzzle. Dexter gets back home and Gigi and Harrison are snogging on the sofa. It could have been much worse if he'd been a few minutes later. Interesting that he lets Harrison go and stay with Gigi. I mean, if they're watching him, if someone's watching, like you have him there at the house because you think that they're closing in on you. If someone had identified you as Dexter Morgan, and you know they're very close to knowing this, they also, that even via Harrison asking a few more questions would get him oh yeah, he was hanging out with his dad. Oh, where is his dad staying now? Could easily find that. Anyway, all that is to say, again, pretty implausible that he'd just be like, sure, go hang out with Gigi tonight. All right, as far as how Gigi's going to be used, at first I was worried that she would be a sacrificial lamb. Now I'm starting to think, is it possible that she's a serial killer in the making, or maybe works for Prater? She's in criminology. There's this weird injury she has to her arm that hasn't been explained. I'm still curious to see how it's going to shake out in the end. She could still be sacrificial lamb. You can imagine they try to track down Harrison. They show up. Harrison's not there, but she is, and then they grab her instead. So that could all shake out somehow in the finale still. But I'm starting to wonder if there's more to her story than we're seeing here. I do like that they acknowledge the fact that blood spatter is no longer considered a true forensic or have the same weight that it used to have back when the Dexter novels were being written initially. He goes, oh, yeah, but when you're as good as I am, when you're committing the murders, they're very good at identifying how the murders were done. This also ties into that show Smoke we were just talking about. It's like, yeah, you're very good at solving the arsons when you're setting the fires. Yes, you are. Then Charlie is showing Prater the ugly scar she's going to have on her neck with this cut. And Prater's like, that's so cool. Wow, you survived a murder. That's awesome. Prater does understand this. At first, I was thinking, is he expect that Charlie is not going to go talk to Prater about this? But of course, especially leaving that cut on her neck, this is all a performance for Prater to tell him to back off. But I'm not sure that's going to work. And that's when Dexter calls. He's like, you scared my girl Friday. And he's like, I still do want to have that conversation with you. Dexter still thinks he's in control here. And they plan to meet early the next morning, the day of the actual gala. And then I don't know if it's that night or very early the next morning, Angel shows up at the mansion in New York saying that you're in danger. He doesn't have his ID. He could just be a crazy kook. And at this moment, I actually thought they're just going to kick him out. He's a nut job. No one's going to listen to what this guy's saying. But Charlie said, wait. Let me hear this guy out, which, she's doing her job. In this case, she's doing a good job here. Yeah. Find out what this guy has to say, even if it does turn out for him to be a total kook. But he's not. He's like, hey, why were you hanging out with that guy? You mean Red? No, Dexter Morgan. Dexter Morgan? Harrison Morgan? Yeah, you're in danger. You don't understand. This guy's the Bay Harbor Butcher. Bay Harbor Butcher? I have those slides in the basement. And Dexter was very interested in those slides when he saw them. I think I finally pieced this all together. Meanwhile, Dexter's getting ready for his meeting. He's got his fake thummy thing going. Shows up. The thummy thing works this time. No problem. Works better this time. Maybe Prater's just like, sure, let him in. Doesn't matter what his fingerprint looks like. And he's like, yeah, let's have that meeting. Dexter Morgan. And then, of course, this is the big dun, dun, dun revelation. And a whole bunch of things happen here. I had predicted this was maybe the direction the series would go in, that Prater knew, and once again, I think this is still the better version of this. Prater discovers pretty early on that this is Dexter Morgan. Dexter Morgan is the Bay Harbor butcher. They have figured this out because Charlie's so good at her job. She has figured this out. And then all of a sudden, here he shows up at the club. People start disappearing, and they're like, of course they are, because he's the Bay Harbor butcher. I have proof now that this is the guy. This is the guy I've been looking for the whole time. And he even says, hey, come work for me. I know where all the serial killers are. You are the coolest of all cool serial killers. You kill other serial killers. You're like a shark that only eats other sharks. You are the coolest shark in the world. Come work for me. I know where all the other sharks live. And that's basically where they end up. That's the offer he makes here. But it could have been the context of the whole show, my opinion. I think that would have been it would have made these people have to make dumb decisions to get to this point. They would have made smart decisions and gotten to this exact same moment. But poor Angel, caught in the crossfire. And once again, my version of it, imagine that they've been figuring this out the whole entire time, testing him, asking him questions about his upbringing, finding out about Harrison, seeing, well, how does he react in this situation? Because now we know it's him, and to see how he reacts. And then finally, Angel shows up to warn him, and he's like, I told the police already. And Prater starts thinking, no, you're going to ruin my plan. You're going to ruin my plan of you being my special best friend serial killer who kills all the other serial killers that I'm constantly researching. So you are like collecting these trophies I want, and you are the top of the heap, just like a scoreboard we can keep. How many killers have you had? How many killers have we taken off the board? Not that he cares about taking them off the board, but he does care about collecting them. And that this guy would be the ultimate collection of serial killers. So this seems to be something that Prater would love to do, and Dexter and him could have been in cahoots earlier on. And then this same moment comes where he's like, Dexter, your friend Angel is here, and he was going to ruin our plans. And of course, Dexter could have been playing along, but still thinking in the back of his mind, how do I get out of this situation? How do I kill Prater and still get what I want? So that's where we've arrived. My alternate route, I think I prefer it. But we get to the same location. And here is Angel. And he's like, prove yourself to me, Dexter Morgan. I know who you are now. Kill him. Put his blood on your slides. And then we will collect so many more killers. All of them. This is better than Pokemon. I said this was like Pokemon. This is so much better than Pokemon. He's like, yeah, I can have this get together every year. And you could just kill whoever you want. I think they would catch on. I don't know where the message boards are on the dark web or wherever they would be for these serial killers to chat up, or what subreddit that happens in. But they'd be like, don't go there. Everybody who goes there dies. Don't go to his meetings anymore. But hey, Dexter can break into anyone's house, apparently, from what we've seen in this particular season of show. And as long as he knows who they are and how to get them, that's all the information he needs. Dexter gets in his Dexter stance with this weapon. I guess it's not his knife. I guess it's just a knife he had there, probably from another serial killer. And he uses it. Looks like he's going to kill Angel, but he doesn't. He actually cuts him loose. And Angel does not clue in what's happening. He attacks Dexter, which gets him shot repeatedly by Prater. I do wonder if this is Prater. First of all, there's this gleeful look on his face, like, ooh, I killed somebody. Yummy, yummy, yummy. So I'm not sure if this isn't the first time he's killed somebody. So maybe he is a serial killer himself. Or if it's just like, ooh, I've been waiting for that for so long. I'm not sure how to read that, but either way, he's loving it. Dexter does get to have a heart-to-heart with Angel before he dies. And I do assume, by the way, there's a version of this where Angel's not dead, and it's possible that he is still alive. There's still a chance, but I'm going to jump ahead to the closing credits, which I haven't really been paying attention to that much in this show. But in the closing credits of this particular episode, they are making a hat. They're showing you how these haberdashers, is that still what they call them, are making this hat. And I think that's an homage to Angel, who we've rarely seen. I think he sleeps with his hat on. I'm just half joking about that too. But he's not in his hat today. He does say to him, I just need you to know that I did not kill Dokes and I did not kill Maria. And I'm really glad that Angel says, you know what? You are responsible for their deaths, even if you didn't pull the trigger. And he's absolutely right. And Dexter does take that. And I think it's something he realizes himself. And of course, we end things on the cover of Mad World, the one that was popularized in Donnie Darko. I'm just seeing here on my Google search that haberdasher is just someone who makes clothing. I guess they would make a hat potentially too. But a hat maker is just a hatter or a milliner? I thought it was a haberdasher. Anyway, this all sets up next episode. What is something what are we going to expect to see in the finale? Okay. Dexter trapped down there. I'm pretty sure Angel's dead. All the cops are going to be at the gala. How does Harrison get brought there? Then there was that invitation of working the post-gala event from his friend. So maybe that's how he shows up. So then he says, hey, can I still tag along with you on that post-gala event at Prater's mansion? He shows up at the mansion. He busts out Dexter. Okay. How is Gigi involved? Does she come along or does she track him down and then get kidnapped herself? I'm just thinking these things out loud. Prater gets killed, and then we set things up for season 2. Once again, the show has been renewed for season 2. By the way, quickly to mention that Original Sin has now been unrenewed. So if you're looking forward to that, everybody, they've decided no Original Sin season 2, only Dexter Resurrection seasons going forward. Probably the right choice. I think this show is significantly more popular than Original Sin. But I'm pretty sure Prater will die. Or does Prater get arrested as the New York Ripper? Because of that, he has the tool in the basement. And I don't know. I'm confused. I really don't know how these pieces are going to fit together next week. But I do think that Prater's either going to go to jail, but then he knows too much. He has to die. Prater has to die. But then there's still a possibility to go back to my thought process around a possible season 2. If Charlie knows how to get access to Prater's money and she wants to have a noble cause, and of course Uma Thurman's a pretty big star to have in your show, she could be like Charlie. Oh, I'm just thinking about this. Charlie's Angels. She could be Charlie to Dexter going in next season to track down these serial killers, and she's the voice on the other side of the phone, like Charlie sending his angels out. Okay, if we're going to do the Charlie's Angels metaphor, we'll have to have Dexter and Harrison and Gigi. Oh man, I think we figured it out. I got to run this by Sona. All right, that's it for my speculation on the finale. We'll know soon enough, about a week ago, I guess. And we'll be having a conversation about how everything lands and what we speculate might be coming in the upcoming seasons. And before that, on Monday, expect to have my conversation of Sona's reaction to this episode. Plus, we will be previewing our next coverage, our week-to-week coverage, Task on HBO or Max or HBO Max or whatever the hell they call it this week. And also, continuing to cover the very intriguing Alien Earth series. Stay tuned for all of that. And subscribe, of course, if you haven't already. Oh, leave us a review if you'd like to support the show. Leave us a review on your podcatcher of choice. Or just recommend this to your friends and family. Are they watching these shows too? Recommend one of our series or one of our backlog episodes. And I'll talk to you soon.